As many of you know, I grew up in southern Kentucky. I wear the boots to date as evidence. And I attended a Catholic elementary school. And my family wasn't Catholic, but my mother taught at this school. She was an art teacher. And my family actually went to the Presbyterian church on Sunday mornings growing up. So it meant that I had this kind of dual religious education. On Tuesdays at school, I went to Catholic Mass, and we had religion class on Thursday afternoons. But on Sunday mornings, I heard Protestant services. So from a very early age, I credit this kind of multiple understandings of truth to the path that brought me into this faith. But my closest friend in 5th grade, grade 5, was Sabina. And she, like me, was one of the small handful of students who wasn't Catholic at the Catholic school. Her family was from India. Her parents had immigrated to be doctors in our small town. And they were Hindu, which we never talked about, but I knew because of the altar that her grandmother tended to near the front door of their home. It included beautiful figurines and statues, and I was fascinated by it, and I would always kind of like secretly sort of check it out when I was at her home. And so it was this very significant day in my memory when we were in religion class in Catholic school, and Sabina and I were sitting next to each other, and we found a page in our Catholic textbook with a diagram that depicted what people, who was closest to God and who was most likely to go to heaven. And it was a large circle with several smaller circles within it. And the widest circle said people who believe in one God. And the smaller circle inside it said Christians. And the smallest circle inside said Catholics. Sabina studied the diagram closely, and she raised her hand. The teacher called on her, and Sabina said, "What about people who are good people, but they don't believe in one God? Are they going to heaven?" The classroom was silent, and I heard our teacher inhale sharply. My mind flashed to Sabina's grandmother, who served us fruit and fresh bread on the mornings when I slept over at her house. Her smile was wide and open, and although we couldn't speak to each other in English, I felt loved in her presence. I thought of Sabina's mother, who I saw come home after long days of talking to people at the hospital, of looking into their ears and eyes and mouths, how she sat with them while they explained what hurt. I thought of Sabina, who sat with me at the lunch table, when most of the girls in grade 5 were crowding around the more popular kids' table, standing, eating their lunch, because they didn't want to be at any table except the one with the class ringleader. And in that moment, I knew from deep within me and with every fiber of my being that Sabina and her family were going to heaven, whatever that meant. And I didn't really know how I knew, and no one had to tell me, and I don't remember what the teacher said to Sabina. But I knew that no one could be excluded or forsaken or drawn outside of the circle of love. It is this community, it is this resonance that I feel here where I trust we are drawing a larger circle. Not defined by the boundaries of who gets into heaven or who has what particular creed. And our circle is not defined by one specific statement of faith to which all the new members must testify and adhere. But what is it, we may wonder, that gives our tradition structure and definition? I have heard, more often than I would like, someone respond to the question of what do Unitarian Universalists believe with two answers that both make me cringe. Nothing. Whatever you want. So let me say definitively up front, as your spiritual leader called and ordained, no. We don't believe in nothing, and no, you cannot be a Unitarian Universalist and believe whatever you want. I'm sorry if you've been misinformed. But no. There are distinctions of our tradition. There is a ground that we stand on, and it is well articulated, unfortunately not by us very well. And I know that we as faith leaders have done perhaps a poor job in making it more accessible or not clear enough. And so if you need to take notes this morning, please do. But don't let me catch you saying that you can believe whatever you want or that we don't believe in anything. Dr. Reverend Rebecca Parker, a teacher of Marcus and I as a theologian, says that it is true, as a Unitarian Universalist, you can hold a belief that there is no God or that God exists. But you cannot hold the view that God is an all-powerful determiner of everything that happens, such that there is no exercise of human freedom. Our tradition is clear that there is some measure of freedom accessible to every living being, given in the nature of things. Here in this congregation, as John articulated, our circle includes mystics and non-mystics, those who worship a God and those who do not. Our common thread is an understanding that whether or not we are theists or atheists, we as human beings have agency and choice. Our thread is freedom. Second, Parker names that you can define salvation, healing, and wholeness in many ways, but you cannot hold the view that there will be an ultimate separation of the saved from the damned, by which the good are rewarded with eternal bliss and the damned are punished with eternal suffering. All souls are of worth. Our thread is salvation, healing, and wholeness, universal for everyone. Third, Parker writes, you can see this world as tragically flawed, wondrously gifted, or both. But you cannot hold the view that salvation is to be found beyond this world, in some life after death or a world other than this one. Our faith is clear that the ultimate is present here and now. And lastly, you can be a devoted Christian or Buddhist, have a particular ritual or meditation, but you cannot hold the view that this practice, that there is one religion that encompasses all the final truth, not even Unitarian Universalism. This is our definitive answer to fundamentalism, including our own fundamentalism, which can so often be a slippery slope into enshrining a static orthodoxy. Our thread is openness. It is continuing to learn and grow. This is a theology of connection, because we know that all that pulls us apart and threatens the wholeness of our beings, it is connection that guides us back. So if your beliefs lead you to be more connected to your deepest self, to others in your family, in your workplace, in your church, to the great community which we all belong, they are in. But if they lead you to disconnection, to treat others poorly, to question your own value, then those beliefs are out. No to all that separates us, and yes to that which leads to connection. This is the circle we have drawn. It is wide, and yet it is not so ambiguous not to have shape or form. So I understand that might be a bit of a mouthful to say when asked, what do we believe? And it's true, so often I myself even start out by saying what we're not. We're not held together by a single belief or an all-inclusive statement. In fact, when people ask, sometimes I say, yeah, people in our congregation are atheists. What? Excuse me? People say. Well, I say we're not Christian, except some of us are. And we're not Jewish, well, except some of us are. And we're kind of pagan. Yeah, a lot of us, actually, even if we don't use the word. And some of us are Buddhist, at least half these days, it seems. And we're mystics, but some people clearly are not mystics. We're a lot of scientists, really. Teachers, environmentalists, entrepreneurs, home healthcare workers, advocates, writers, rugby players, parents. By this point, most people are utterly confused. Recently, in the preparation we're doing for updating our church website, I was looking at another church website, and I happened to glance at the upcoming events at another congregation. In 1 week, it included a Spanish class for seniors, a planning meeting for a maypole ritual, a workshop on civil disobedience, a book group reading The God Delusion by famous atheist Christopher Dawkins, and a prayer group for people living with cancer. Yeah, I thought to myself, that's my kind of church. Certainly our religious ancestors, those hardy Puritans, could not have fathomed our modern-day existence. They would have been appalled by agnosticism and let alone a notion that God may not exist. They would have burned us at the stake. And yet, at the heart of our Unitarian faith, which has dramatically shaped and influenced Western liberalism and democratic institutions for 2 centuries, remains this central question. How will I be in relationship to others? In 1638, Europeans fleeing state religious oppression gathered to organize what became the first free church in North America. It was of utmost importance to them to define what this free church meant. What would it be to organize a community around something other than the decree of monarchy? Rejecting a king God, by what powers and on whose authority would there be an organization and a reign in this fragile new world? I think it is hard to remember in the current context in our modern lives the radicalness of this question. We know that nations were formed, rulers rose and fall, generations immigrated, and entire populations flourished or starved based on how people responded to this question: who's in charge and who am I responsible to? The founding members of that first congregation wrote that the free church was defined as a group of people who want the spirit of love to reign in our lives. Their founding documents detail how members would come to know one another better, how they would handle conflict. They wrote, "We shall walk together in love and be in continuous consultation with one another." Could there be a more accurate description of us even today? We are a people who are in continuous consultation. And are we yet? The ancestors question us, beseech us, a people for whom the spirit of love reigns in our lives. I hope so. I hope that is our intention. And like all covenants which are aspirational, not contractual, we fall short of our own highest resolve. From my perspective, we make 2 primary mistakes. First is that we fail to define ourselves by what we do believe. And second, we narrow our own sense of who belongs by asking, sometimes subconsciously, are they already similar enough to me? am I certain I won't be too threatened by who they are? When Marcus and I ask people who come to the church why they first came, or we ask long-term members why they've stuck around, invariably some people respond with a version of, I was looking for a community of like-minded people. Imagine for a moment if the group in 1683 had said, our intention is to be a group of like-minded people. Where would that have gotten them? So even as we are rooted in covenant in our free choice, we need to be careful not to too narrowly define who's included. Because what holds us together is not our absence of creed, which we often lift up first, but rather our comfort with the ambiguity and uncertainty and unknown answers we may come to. And from this place, we still make a choice to walk together in love through our differences, in experience or belief. Susan Frederick Gray, minister in Phoenix, Arizona, points out that so often we say, oh, we're religious freedom, you can believe whatever you want. But the truth is that that's not the most important thing about us, because you can believe whatever you want, staying at home, watching TV. You can believe whatever you want, walking in the woods. You can believe whatever you want, driving your car. You can believe whatever you want, watching the football game. But all of you made a choice to come together, to be next to people who may not believe exactly as you do. And it is that choice which brings us out of isolation and out of what are so often selfish concerns. Reflecting on this is the messy, hard work of covenant, of commitment, and ultimately of community. Is it only with the people in this sanctuary with whom you feel comfortable and are like-minded? Is it only with the people who share the same theological orientation as you? Is it only with those in your own demographic, class, age, sexuality, family structure? Who are you in covenant with? Amidst the torrents of egregious headlines this week, from deportations to wiretaps, my heart was lifted reading this story. As you may be aware, hate crime is on the rise since the U.S. November election. And over the past 3 weeks, there have been particularly atrocious incidents at Jewish cemeteries. In Philadelphia, St. Louis, and New York, there's been vandalization, tombstones turned over, desecrated. All of this on the heels of reports documenting bomb threats at Jewish community centers, often places where there are childcare programs, sparking fear and anxiety in parents and neighbors. In response, 2 Muslims, Linda Sarsour and Tariq El-Marsid, started a campaign to raise money to rebuild and repair these cemeteries. In 3 hours, they reached their fundraising goal of $20,000. In 24 hours, more than $80,000, 4 times their original goal, raising $1,000 every 20 minutes, primarily from people from Muslim communities. The originators of this campaign wrote, "We reflect on the message of unity, tolerance, and mutual protection found in the Constitution of Medina, an ancient historical contract between the Medinan Jews and the first Muslim community. We are inspired by the example of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who stood up to pay respects for a passing Jewish funeral procession. When questioned on why he rose for a Jewish funeral, he responded, 'Is it not a human soul?' Is it not a human soul? Draw the circle wide, my friends, for we are all inside. And this week, this month, find a moment. Find a moment to talk to someone who you probably wouldn't normally. Maybe because of gender or race or politics. Spend more time listening than talking with your heart. And in doing so, you will be living out our faith. For if you want to be in a place where everyone sees the world exactly the way you do, you have come to the wrong place. And if you want to be in a place where we are testing how far love can go, you have come to the right place. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.